Airports are usually noisy places, filled with the clatter of trolley wheels, hurried footsteps, and the constant echo of announcements bouncing off the high glass walls. But that morning, at Jinnah International Airport, Karachi, a single voice pierced through the noise. It was not the voice of a child crying, not the chatter of a tourist, but a scream that sent shivers down the spine of everyone present. Please do something. The words tore through the air, full of raw desperation. Heads turned, security guards froze mid-step. Passengers waiting in lines craned their necks to see what had happened. In the middle of the departure hall, near the seating area, stood Saim, a man in his late 30s dressed in an immaculate black suit, his tie loosened in panic, his expensive leather briefcase lying forgotten on the floor, and in his trembling arms was a boy, no older than 8, his own son, his only child. The boy's face was turning a terrifying shade of blue. He was choking. Saim, one of the most powerful self-made millionaires in the country, a man who owned hotels, airlines, and had dined with presidents, was reduced to nothing but a helpless father in that moment. His wealth, his power, his influence, none of it mattered as he screamed for help. Somebody, please. He can't breathe. Please do something. People froze. Some gasped. Others shouted in confusion. A woman covered her mouth in horror. Security called for medical staff, but in emergencies even seconds feel like hours. And then, from the corner of the hall, pushing her worn-out mop bucket aside, Kinza appeared. Kinza was not supposed to be noticed. She was one of the hundreds of invisible workers who kept the shining glass floors of the airport spotless for wealthy travelers like Saim. Dressed in her plain blue uniform, with a white apron that bore water stains, yellow gloves still damp. From cleaning, she looked like someone who belonged in the shadows, not in the center of a crisis. But at that moment, it wasn't her job that spoke. It was her instinct. She saw the child, his eyes wide with fear, his little hands clawing at his throat. She saw the millionaire father, strong enough to run an empire, but powerless against this invisible enemy, lodged in his son's airway, and without a second thought, she ran forward. "Move back!" she shouted, her voice steadier than anyone expected. "I know what to do!" The crowd, stunned by the authority in her tone, stepped aside. Even Saim, his face wet with tears, looked at her in disbelief. A cleaning lady? But when she reached for the boy, her hands did not tremble. Kinza gently placed the boy on his feet and positioned herself behind him. She wrapped her arms around his small torso, her gloved hands locking just above his belly button. Saim's voice cracked. "Please, please save him." Kinza ignored the noise of the world. In her mind, time slowed down. She remembered a workshop she had once attended years ago, offered free by a small NGO that trained workers like her in basic first aid. At the time, she had never imagined she would actually use the Heimlich maneuver in real life. But now, that memory was the only weapon she had. She pressed hard, thrusting inward and upward with sharp force, once, twice, 3 times. The boy gagged, his tiny body jerking forward. People gasped. Some even prayed under their breath. And then, suddenly, a small piece of candy shot out of his mouth, rolling across the polished airport floor. The boy coughed violently, air rushing back into his lungs. His color returned slowly, his wide eyes watering as he collapsed into his father's arms. The hall erupted into collective relief. Some clapped instinctively, others wiped their tears. Saim sank to his knees, clutching his son close, crying openly. Now, his polished, commanding voice was gone, replaced with the trembling sobs of a man who had just watched his entire world almost disappear. He looked up at Kinza. For a moment he couldn't speak. His lips moved, but the words refused to form. "How do you thank someone who has just given you back your child?" Finally, his hoarse whisper came out. You saved him." Kinza took a step back, almost embarrassed by the attention. She pulled off her yellow gloves, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. She was just a cleaning lady. wasn't used to people staring at her, let alone a millionaire looking at her as if she were the most important person in the world. "I just did what anyone should," she said softly, her eyes downcast. But Saim knew better. He had seen with his own eyes how the world freezes when money has no value, when panic consumes reason, and all that remains is courage. And in that frozen moment, only one person had moved. Not a doctor, not a security officer, not a passenger, in business class, but a cleaning lady with calloused hands and a heart stronger than all of them. Airport medical staff finally arrived, rushing in with stretchers and oxygen masks, but by then the boy was already safe. They checked his breathing, gave him some water, and declared he was out of danger. The crowd began to disperse, but the whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see? The cleaning woman saved his life. She was braver than anyone here. Unbelievable." Saim held his son tightly, but his eyes never left Kinza. Something inside him shifted that day. For years, he had measured people by contracts, by net worth, by how much they could contribute to his empire. But today, in the middle of an airport, with his world crumbling and then being rebuilt in front of his eyes, he realized true worth had nothing to do with money. It had to do with courage, compassion, and the will to act when everyone else froze. And Kinza, the woman nobody noticed, had just taught the millionaire a lesson he would never forget. That night, long after his flight was canceled, long after the cameras and onlookers had gone, Saim sat in the quiet VIP lounge with his sleeping son beside him. His eyes were still swollen from crying, but his mind replayed the same moment again and again, Kinza stepping forward when no one else did. He whispered to himself, as if making a vow, "This woman's life will never be the same again." Because Saim was not just any father. He was a man who had the power to change destinies. And Kinza had just changed his. The next morning, Karachi's newspapers and online portals carried the same headline: "Millionaire's son saved by airport cleaning lady." Some outlets had grainy cell phone videos. Others had blurry pictures of Saim on his knees, clutching his son while a woman in a blue uniform with a white apron stood behind them. The story spread like wildfire, not just because of Saim's wealth and influence, but because of the miracle that had unfolded in plain sight. For most people, it was just another viral story that would be forgotten in a few days. But for Saim, it was not something he could scroll past and ignore. For him, it was a scar and a blessing combined. Every time he looked at his son sleeping peacefully, he remembered the boy's face turning blue, his little hands reaching out, his own helpless scream for help. And then, he remembered Kinza. The world called her a cleaning lady, but to him, she was the reason his son was alive. That day, instead of heading to his corporate office as usual, Saim told his driver to take him back to the airport, not to board a flight, but to find her. The airport was bustling as always. Passengers dragged heavy luggage, families hugged in farewells, announcements echoed above. But Saim's sharp eyes searched for one face, the woman who had been braver than everyone else. He asked security guards. They shrugged. He asked a floor supervisor. The man rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Sir, the cleaning staff are contracted workers. They come and go. I don't know all their names." But Saim was not the kind of man who gave up. "Then find her," he said firmly. "The woman who saved my son. Her name is Kinza." The supervisor's eyes widened. "Oh, Kinza Bibi? Yes, she's been working here for years. Very quiet woman. You'll usually find her in the east wing near the restrooms." When Saim finally saw her again, she was back to her world of invisibility. She stood bent over a mop, scrubbing a corner of the terminal floor where someone had spilled tea. Her apron was damp, her hair covered with a simple scarf, her face glistening with sweat. She looked like every other worker people passed by without a second glance. But to Saim, she looked like the woman who had stopped his world from collapsing. Kinza. She turned, startled. For a moment, She almost dropped her mop. Nobody ever called her by name here. Supervisors barked orders, passengers ignored her, and her colleagues chatted among themselves. But here was a millionaire, the millionaire, standing before her with eyes that carried both gratitude and pain. "Sir," she whispered, unsure of how to respond. Saim took a deep breath. His voice was softer than yesterday's scream, but carried the same weight. "I owe you everything. My son owes you his life. If you hadn't—" His voice broke, and he shook his head. "I don't even want to finish that sentence." Kinza shifted awkwardly. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she wasn't used to wealthy men looking at her as if she mattered. "Please, sir, don't thank me. Anyone would have done it." "No," Saim said firmly, his eyes locking onto hers. "No one else did. Everyone froze. Everyone waited. But you moved. You saved him." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of wheels rolling across polished floors and the distant announcement of a boarding gate. Kinza lowered her gaze. "I just remembered what I was taught. Years ago, an NGO came and trained us in first aid. Most of us forgot. I didn't, that's all." Saim smiled sadly. "That's all?" "That's everything, Kinza." She tried to return to her work, but Saim stopped her gently. "Please, tell me, how do you live like this? Working endless hours, cleaning up after people who don't even see you." Her lips curved in a faint, tired smile. "Because I don't have a choice, sir. My husband passed away when my daughter was only 3. Now she's 12. School fees, rent, food, it all comes from this job. I can't afford to be invisible, but I have to be." The weight of her words struck Saim harder than he expected. Here was a woman carrying burdens silently, while he, with all his wealth, had taken so much in life for granted. That night, as Saim sat in his mansion overlooking the city lights, he couldn't stop thinking about her. His son, little Daniel, was asleep in his room, but Saim's mind replayed Kinza's quiet strength over and over. Why her? He wondered aloud. Why did God send her in that moment? The truth dawned on him slowly. Perhaps it wasn't just Daniel who was saved yesterday. Perhaps Saim himself was saved too. Saved from arrogance, from blindness, from forgetting that true value in life lies not in wealth, but in humanity. The next morning he made a decision. He called his personal assistant. "Find everything you can about Kinza, her family, her needs, her life, quietly. I don't want to embarrass her. But I can't let her live like this anymore, not after what she's done for me." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? She's just a cleaning lady." Saim's eyes hardened. "She is not just anything. She is the reason I still have a son. Do not ever reduce her to just. Find her details." Meanwhile, Kinza went about her routine as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She still scrubbed floors, still pushed her mop bucket, still endured the indifference of thousands of strangers who walked past her every day. But deep down, something had shifted in her too. The look in Saim's eyes when he spoke to her, that fierce gratitude, that respect, was something she had never seen from anyone in her life. For the first time in years, she felt like her existence had mattered. And though she tried to bury the thought, a small voice inside her whispered, "Maybe this moment will change everything." What neither of them knew was that their worlds, one of luxury and one of struggle, were about to collide in ways neither could imagine. For fate had brought them together once, and it was not finished yet. Saim didn't remember how many hours had passed since the paramedics had taken his daughter away. The airport that once echoed with rushing footsteps and impatient announcements now felt like a blur in his memory. But one thing remained crystal clear, Kinza's trembling hands pressing against his little girl's chest, her voice breaking through chaos, whispering, "Stay alive, baby. Breathe for your father." Those words were still burning in his ears. Saim sat in the private hospital lounge, his shirt stained with sweat and fear. He was a man used to control. Every deal, every signature, every empire of his carefully built fortune had been his doing. Yet tonight, he had felt utterly powerless. He pressed his palms into his face, dragging them down slowly. "God, just don't take her away." It was then the door opened. He looked up. Kinza stepped in, hesitating like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there. Her uniform was still crumpled, her eyes red from crying, but she carried herself with a strange dignity. Saim rose immediately. "You?" He faltered. The words wouldn't come. I just wanted to know how she is," Kinza said softly. "The doctors didn't tell me much. I thought maybe—" Saim swallowed, the lump in his throat tightening. He nodded. "She's stable now. They said, if it weren't for you, she might not have made it to the hospital in time." Kinza lowered her gaze, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag. "I didn't do much. Anyone would have done it." "No," Saim said firmly, taking a step closer. "Not anyone. Hundreds of people froze today. Some pulled out phones to record instead of help. But you didn't hesitate." His words made her chest ache. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone thanked. People usually passed by her like she was invisible, just another uniform blending into the background of polished marble floors. "Your daughter reminded me of my little brother," Kinza admitted after a pause. Her voice cracked slightly. "He died when I was 12, a fever. We didn't have money for medicine. I couldn't let another child slip away if there was something, anything I could do." Her confession struck Saim like a punch. He had grown up with every privilege. Private. Doctors, imported medicines, round-the-clock care. The idea that a child could die simply because of poverty made his chest feel unbearably heavy. He wanted to say something, but words failed. So he just stared at her, seeing not just a cleaning lady anymore, but a woman carrying silent battles on her shoulders. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, with something unspoken. Finally, Saim cleared his throat. "What's your name?" "Kinza," she replied softly. He repeated it, almost testing how it felt on his tongue. "Kinza. Thank you." For the first time since the chaos, she smiled faintly. Not a wide smile, but a small, tired curve of lips that carried warmth. That night, when the doctors allowed Saim to sit by his daughter's bedside, Kinza turned to leave quietly. She had done her part. Her world didn't belong among billionaires and private hospital corridors. But before she could slip out, a small voice called behind her. "Kinza?" It was Saim. He stood in the doorway, his figure tall, his eyes searching. "Yes?" she asked, almost nervous. "You saved my world today," he said simply. "I won't forget this." Kinza opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because what could she say? She wasn't looking for gratitude or recognition or rewards. She had acted on instinct, but the sincerity in his tone made her heart tremble. Over the next few days, Saim visited his daughter daily, and each time he caught glimpses of Kinza. She never intruded, but she always checked with the nurses, always asked quietly if the little girl was healing. She never expected to be noticed. But Saim noticed everything, the way her hands carried scars of labor, the way she flinched whenever she walked past wealthy passengers at the airport, as though she had learned to make herself smaller in front of them. The way her voice softened every time she asked about his daughter, as though she had known love and loss deeply. One evening, he approached her outside the hospital cafe. "Kinza," he said, "sit with me for a moment." She hesitated, but obeyed. For the first time, He didn't look like the untouchable millionaire she'd seen screaming in the airport. He looked human, vulnerable. "Do you know?" he began quietly. "I built everything in my life by making sure I was stronger, faster, smarter than the rest. But today I realized all my power meant nothing when I saw my daughter stop breathing." Kinza looked at him, her eyes glistening. "And then you came," he whispered. "You did what I couldn't. You reminded me that sometimes strength isn't in money or power. It's in humanity." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She tried to look away, but Saim reached across the table, his hand hovering, hesitant, before finally resting gently over hers. Kinza froze. "Don't disappear from my life, Kinza," he said, his voice almost a plea. The world seemed to stop. Her heart pounded. She wanted to tell him that men like him didn't keep women like her in their worlds, that she was nobody, a shadow, a cleaner who had to work double shifts to pay rent. But the way he looked at her, like she was the only real person he'd met in years, stole her words. She stammered, pulling her hand back gently. "I don't belong in your world, Saim." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it, because deep down, something had already shifted. That night, as Kinza walked home through the dimly lit streets, her bag heavy on her shoulder, her heart was heavier still. She replayed everything, his eyes, his words, his touch. Her life had always been about survival, work, earn, sleep, repeat. Dreams were luxuries she had long buried. But for the first time in years, she wondered, could there be more? She shook her head quickly, almost scolding herself. "Don't be foolish, Kinza. Men like him don't look back." And yet, even as she whispered the warning to herself, her heart refused to let go of the way Saim had said her name. But neither of them knew then. That destiny had only just begun weaving them together, because the world would test them soon. And the lines between billionaire and cleaning lady, between power and humility, between despair and love, were about to blur in ways neither imagined. The silence that followed Saim's desperate scream at the airport seemed to linger forever. But what broke it wasn't chaos. It was a slow, thunderous applause. People clapped, not because of the medical team who had eventually stabilized the man who fainted, but because of Kinza, the humble cleaning lady who had been the first to step forward when no one else dared. She stood there awkwardly, her hands still trembling, her uniform damp with sweat, her scarf loose around her neck. She had never in her life been the center of attention. Her instinct had been simple: help, because no one else was moving. Saim looked at her differently now, not as a worker in the background, not as someone invisible, but as the woman who had acted with more courage than any millionaire, executive, or traveler standing in that terminal. "Kinza," he said softly, as though he were addressing someone far greater than himself. "You saved his life." She shook her head quickly, embarrassed. I only did what anyone should do, sir. Please don't say it like that." But he did say it like that, because it was true. The private jet hours later, after the situation calmed, Saim surprised everyone by requesting that Kinza accompany him on his private jet back to the city. She refused at first. How could she, a cleaning lady, sit in a jet where even the pillows probably cost more than her month's salary? But he insisted. "You don't understand," Saim said. "You reminded me of something I lost long ago, the belief that one act of humanity is greater than all the wealth in the world. You have to come with me." With hesitation, she agreed. Inside the jet, she sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, afraid to even touch the armrest. Saim watched her for a while, then smiled gently. "You know, Kinza," he began, "people like me spend fortunes trying to look important. But today, in that airport, when I screamed and froze, the only important person was you." Her throat tightened. "Please don't make me feel bigger than I am. I'm just ordinary." He leaned forward. "No, Kinza, you're extraordinary. Ordinary people don't risk their jobs or their dignity to step forward when everyone else stays frozen. That's not ordinary. That's heroism. For the first time in years, Kinza felt tears sting her eyes, not from exhaustion, not from humiliation, but from being seen. A life rewritten. Over the next few weeks, Saim made sure Kinza was no longer invisible. He arranged for her to attend medical training classes, fully paid. He gave her family a safe apartment so her children didn't have to live in the cramped, leaky place they had called home. At first, she resisted every gift. "I don't deserve this. I only did what was right." But Saim's answer was always the same, and that's exactly why you deserve it. The millionaire who once measured his worth by profit margins began to measure it differently. Every time he saw Kinza smile shyly at her children's joy, he felt wealthier than when his name appeared in global magazines. Kinza's life began to transform. She was still humble, still worked when she could, but now she carried a new sense of dignity. People who once ignored her now looked up to her. But for Saim, something else was happening too. The confession. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Saim invited Kinza to his office. He had cleared the room of his usual board members and advisors. It was only the two of them. "Kinza," he said, his voice strangely unsteady, "I have lived with every luxury money can buy. But for years I've been empty inside. That day, at the airport, when I screamed for help, I thought all my power, all my influence would matter. But it didn't. You mattered. You taught me that humanity is greater than wealth." She listened silently, unsure where his words were leading. "And now," he continued, taking a step closer, "I realize something else. I don't just admire you for what you did. I respect you. I care for you, in a way I can't ignore anymore." Her breath caught. "Saim." "I know," he said quickly, raising a hand. "Our worlds are different. I am a man people call powerful. You are a woman who has known struggle. But perhaps that is why I need you in my life. Because you remind me what really matters." Kinza lowered her eyes, her heart pounding. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not as a maid, not as a charity case, but as a woman. The choice, she didn't answer immediately. Days passed before she gave him her reply. One evening she stood with him on the balcony of his home, looking out over the glittering city lights. "Saim," she whispered, "when you first spoke to me that way, I was afraid. Afraid people would laugh. Afraid the world would call me a fool for even standing next to you. But then I realized the world already laughed at me when I scrubbed floors. The world already ignored me when I worked through the night. What more can it take from me?" He turned toward her, eyes searching hers. She smiled faintly. "If you're asking me to walk beside you, not above, not below, but beside, then yes. My answer is yes." His heart, hardened by years of boardroom battles, finally softened. Epilogue. The new definition of wealth. Months later, newspapers carried a story that stunned the nation. Not about a business merger, not about a billionaire's new mansion, but about a wedding, one between a millionaire businessman and the cleaning lady who once saved a stranger at an airport. Reporters tried to spin it into a fairy tale. But for Saim and Kinza, it was not about glamour or headlines. It was about truth. For Saim, wealth was no longer the number of zeros in his bank account. It was the sound of Kinza's laughter echoing through his once empty home. It was the look in her children's eyes when they called him uncle. It was the quiet strength of the woman who had changed his life with one act of courage. And for Kinza, life was no longer about invisibility. She wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She was a woman who had found her worth, her voice, and her place beside the man who had once screamed for help, but learned through her what it meant to truly live.